The sound hit before anyone understood what had happened. One sharp crack, like something expensive breaking, and then the entire ballroom went silent. Kendra's hand was still raised. The red shape of her palm was already rising on Haruto Mori's jaw. 200 people stopped breathing at exactly the same moment, and in that stillness, before the guards moved and before Yumi screamed and before the night became something none of them would forget, Kendra pressed a folded piece of paper into his open hand and put her mouth close enough to his ear that only he could hear her. "Read it. Do not react." Then the hands grabbed her, and the room came apart. Hey family, welcome back to Arden Tells Tales. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from. Your comments are what keep these stories coming. If you have not subscribed yet, hit that button because what happens in this story will stay with you long after it ends. Now, let's get into it. The ballroom did not just react. It fractured. Conversations died mid-word. A champagne flute hit the marble floor, and not one person looked down. Men who had ordered violence without raising their voices stood completely still with their hands moving toward their jackets. Because something had happened in this room that rewrote every rule about what was possible inside it. Haruto Mori did not move. He stood exactly where he had been standing, tall and broad in his dark gray suit, the tattoo visible above his collar, his jaw turned to the side from the force of the impact. He was the kind of man rooms organize themselves around without being asked. The most feared person in the building. And a waitress had just slapped him in front of everyone who mattered to him. The slap had lasted less than a second. In that second, Kendra had folded 4 months of careful invisibility into one irreversible act. Her voice came out low and unsteady as she pressed the note into his palm. "Read it. Do not react." Then the hands grabbed her. 2 security men, both larger, both fast, yanking her backward hard enough that she stumbled. Someone in the crowd said her name. Someone else cursed in a language she did not recognize. Chairs scraped as men stood. The room was a held breath waiting to become something much worse. "Get her out.
Right now."
Yumi's voice cut through from the right, clean and controlled, but fraying at the edges. She was standing in white from her shoulders to the floor, her champagne glass still raised, her dark eyes wide with something that looked like shock but moved wrong around the edges. "She does not belong here. Get her away from him." Kendra did not fight the men holding her. Her heart was so loud, she could feel it in her jaw, but her eyes stayed on Haruto's face. She needed one thing from him. One signal that the paper in his closed fist had reached him before they dragged her out, and whatever happened next happened in the dark. The sound of the slap was still in the air when the first guard's hand closed around Kendra's left arm above the elbow, hard enough that she felt it in her shoulder socket. The second guard stepped directly in front of her, cutting off her view of the room. Around them 200 people stood frozen, watching the way crowds watch things that have not finished being terrible yet. Yumi moved first. She crossed the floor in small, precise steps, her white dress moving cleanly around her ankles, and arranged her face into something that looked like injured dignity. Kendra noticed it through the pain in her arm. The expression was technically correct. The eyes were doing something else entirely. "She put her hands on you," Yumi said, her voice pitched to carry to the 30 nearest people. "In front of everyone. You cannot let this stand, Haruto. Whatever she thought she was doing, she does not get to walk out of here." Haruto had not moved. He was still standing in the same spot, his jaw turned slightly from the force of the slap, the mark darkening on his cheek. One hand was closed at his side. Then he raised it, palm out, toward the guards holding Kendra. He said nothing. He did not need to. The guards let go. Yumi's mouth opened. Haruto turned to Sato, the broad-shouldered head of his security who had been with him for 11 years, and said 4 words quietly enough that only the nearest people heard them. "Walk with me." He looked at Kendra once. Then he moved toward the side corridor near the east wall, and she followed because the alternative was to stay in a room where Yumi was already recalculating. Yumi watched them go, and her expression had stopped performing. The room had no windows. One overhead light that hummed faintly, and made everything look slightly colder than it was. A table, 2 chairs, a guard whose shadow Kendra could see through the gap at the bottom of the door. She sat down and pressed her hands flat on the table because she did not trust her lap to hold them steady. Haruto stood with his back to her for a moment and then opened his right hand and looked at what was inside it. The note was small. She had written it in the kitchen on a torn corner of a paper order slip, pressing hard with a pen that was nearly dry, folding it 4 times to make it small enough to disappear in a closed fist. He read it once. Read it again. Set it flat on the table between them. How do you know this? She told him about the corridor. The empty tray. Yumi's voice coming around the corner, low and unhurried, speaking about Haruto's death the way someone discusses a collection being rescheduled. She gave him the exact words. It has to be after the signing. Once everything is in my name, it just has to look like an accident. Haruto was still while she talked. When she finished, he asked the question she had been hoping he would not ask. How did you know what that kind of language meant? Kendra stopped. It was the kind of stopping that has nothing to do with thinking and everything to do with a door you have kept shut for 3 years suddenly being directly in front of your face. She looked at the table. She looked at the note. She looked at him. I recognized it, she said carefully, because someone used it around me once before. Haruto held her gaze without filling the silence, and what she did not know was that he had already sent Sato a message from his pocket asking him to find out exactly who she was. She did not tell him everything. She told him what he needed to understand, why she had recognized Yumi's voice in that corridor, and she chose each piece carefully, the way you choose which parts of a wound to show a stranger. She told him she had spent 2 years with a man named Marcus who discussed harming people the same way someone discusses running errands. Calm. Methodical. As if the feeling had been removed from the words long ago, and only the schedule remained. Marcus had a word for it. He called it making arrangements. That was the phrase he used when he meant that someone was going to be removed from a situation permanently. He had never used that language about Kendra directly. He had not needed to. He had used it about other people while she was in a room, and the point was always that she was in the room. That she was supposed to understand the geography of her situation without him ever having to draw it plainly. When she heard Yumi in that corridor, it was not the words that stopped her feet. It was the specific quality of the calm underneath the words, the calm that only exists in a person who has stopped feeling anything about what they are describing. Kendra knew that calm. She had lived inside its edges for 2 years. Haruto had not sat down through any of this. He stood with his weight evenly distributed and watched her the way someone watches a fire they need to understand before they decide how to handle it. Where are you staying tonight? He said when she stopped. She told him. The guest house 3 streets over. Weekly rate. No second form of identification required. He nodded slowly. You are not going back there, he said. Tonight or any night after it. She opened her mouth to argue, and then she looked at his face and understood that Sato had already reported back, and that Haruto now knew things about her that she had not yet chosen to say out loud, and that the conversation had shifted in a direction she had not seen coming. The car was black and quiet, the windows tinted dark enough that the city outside looked like something happening to someone else. Kendra sat with her hands in her lap and watched the streets change. She knew the part of the city where the shift had started. She did not recognize where they were going. The buildings got taller, more spread out, the light softer, and when the car turned through a gated entrance, she understood she had crossed a line that had nothing to do with geography. Sato held the front door, without looking at her directly. Professional, careful. He placed himself briefly between her and the staircase before stepping aside, the way someone does when they are running a calculation they would prefer you not to see. Her room was on the 2nd floor. Large and clean and very still. The bed had more pillows than she had owned in 3 years combined. One window faced an interior courtyard. She understood without being told that the direction it faced was not accidental. Haruto came in 20 minutes later carrying 2 cups of tea he had made himself. That detail surprised her more than the car or the gate. He sat across from her and said simply, "Start from the moment you heard her voice. Take your time." So she did. She told him everything in sequence, and his questions were quiet and specific and showed her that he was listening to the space between her words and not just the words themselves. She told him things she had not planned to say. He said things she had not expected. At some point, she noticed the tea was cold and realized she did not know how long they had been sitting there, and when she looked up, he was watching her with an expression she did not yet have a name for. What she did not know, and would not know until morning, was that while they were in that room learning each other, Yumi had already made a phone call. Sato knocked at 6 in the morning. Kendra heard the low exchange of words through the door, and then silence for a long time. When Haruto came in, he was carrying a folder, and something in his face had changed overnight into something quieter and more permanent than anger. He set the folder open on the table and did not tell her not to look. The top document was the prenuptial asset transfer, Haruto's signature at the bottom, clean and certain. The signature of a man who had trusted the hand that passed him the pen. Sato had flagged 4 clauses buried in the middle pages, written in language technical enough to look like estate planning and specific enough, once you understood what you were reading, to hand Yumi controlling access to 3 of Haruto's primary holding accounts the moment the marriage was legally recorded. 3 days ago, Haruto had signed it at the dining table of this same house. Yumi had folded it into her bag and kissed him on the cheek before she left. The second page was a communication record. 14 months of contact between a private number and a coordination line tied to a rival faction, highlighted in red by Sato. 14 months. The engagement had been announced 13 months ago. Yumi had started building this before she said yes. Haruto closed the folder. He stood with both hands flat on the table and looked at the wall, and Kendra watched him take the full weight of it without making a sound, without his face offering anything that anyone in the room could use against him, and she understood then exactly what kind of man she had slapped. She was never going to make it to the wedding, he said quietly. What Kendra did not realize was that he was not talking about Yumi. He waited until after breakfast to bring it up, which she understood was deliberate. He was the kind of man who chose his timing the way other people chose their words. He slid a single page across the kitchen table and said it was a proposal, not an order, and that she should read all of it before saying anything. She read it twice. It was clean and direct. She would be formally listed as a named associate under his protection, her name appearing in documents that certain people in this city knew better than to interfere with. She would be legally shielded from any outstanding exposure connected to the name she had been using for the last 14 months. In exchange, she would share everything she knew about Marcus, his network, his contacts, and his methods, because Sato had already found the thread connecting Marcus's operation to the same faction that had been meeting with Yumi for those same 14 months. Kendra put the page down. "No ownership," she said. "None. No obligations I haven't agreed to in writing. Every condition you set goes into the document before you sign it. And if I decide to leave, then you leave," he said. "Protected. With everything you came in with, and everything this arrangement earns you. No questions and no one following you out." She looked at him for a long time, searching for the place where the offer became a frame around a door. She had learned from Marcus that every open offer had a frame, and the frame was always the part that mattered. But Haruto held her look without adding anything to it, and eventually she picked up the pen and added 3 conditions in her own handwriting along the bottom margin. He read them and annulled each one immediately. Sato witnessed it from across the room, pen already in hand, and she noticed he did not look surprised, which meant Haruto had told him to be ready, which meant Haruto had already known she would say yes, and she was not sure yet whether that should come for her. The 4 men were already seated when Haruto brought her in, all older, all carrying the particular stillness of people who had long ago learned that showing what they thought in these rooms could cost them something real. Haruto walked to the head of the table and pulled out the chair directly to his right and looked at her, and she sat down. The shift in the room was immediate and physical. The heavy-set man with gray at his temples, whose name was Goto, glanced at Sato near the door with a question Sato did not answer. Renji, younger, narrow-faced, with quick eyes that catalogued everything, looked at Kendra the way you look at an object placed somewhere it should not be. The first 20 minutes ran without anyone addressing her directly. Dense financial language, the kind that was deliberately layered to be confusing to anyone who had not spent years inside it. Then Goto turned to Haruto and said, without looking at Kendra, that perhaps certain guests would be more comfortable elsewhere while the details were worked through. Kendra said, the 3 accounts flagged in clauses 7, 9, and 12 can be frozen before the reversal is filed if you move through the secondary holding structure first rather than the primary. It takes the activation window down from 72 hours to 8. The room went quiet in a specific way. Goto looked at her directly for the first time. Renji's pen had stopped. Haruto's expression did not change, which told her he had known she could do this before she had shown him, and the question that sat in her chest for the rest of the meeting was how. By 9 o'clock the staff had pulled back and the house settled into a different kind of quiet. Haruto was on the couch with his jacket off and his sleeves pushed up. Kendra came in from the kitchen with water and sat at the other end because it was the most natural thing and she was too tired to calculate it. They did not speak for a while. Does it always feel like that? She said eventually. Like what? Like every person in the room is performing a version of themselves that has nothing to do with what they actually think. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. You get used to the weight of it. You stop noticing it the way you stop noticing a sound that never goes away. That sounds exhausting, she said, and then caught herself using his own word back at him and almost pulled it back. He looked at her sideways. You said you used to perform invisible. What does that feel like from the inside? She thought about it honestly. Like holding your breath in a room where nobody knows you're there. You're safe as long as you don't breathe too loud. He nodded as if that meant something specific. She was going to ask what. But the quiet between them had become something fragile in a way she did not want to break, and she left it. It was the most honest conversation she had been inside for 3 years, and neither of them acknowledged that, and that was precisely why it was. His phone lit up on the table between them. He glanced at the screen without picking it up. The name showing under incoming asset inquiries was Marcus Cole. Kendra was not looking at the table when it appeared. The briefing was at 8 the next morning, same table, just Haruto, Sato, Renji, and Kendra. Sato moved through the list methodically, cross-referencing aliases and known contact points. Kendra was following along with her coffee when Sato reached the 4th alias on the list and said it without slowing down. Cole. Asset inquiry unverified. Possible courier access to the Eastern distribution line. She felt it go through her body before she could stop it. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. Her hand on the coffee cup went still. It lasted less than 2 seconds, and then she pulled herself back and breathed normally and kept her eyes on the table. But Haruto had been watching the room the way he always watched the room, and when she looked up he was already looking somewhere else, and she understood immediately that he had seen it and chosen not to say anything yet, which was worse than if he had stopped the briefing entirely. Sato continued for 10 more minutes. When it was done, Renji left first, nodding at Kendra with the careful respect he had been showing her since the day before. Sato paused at the door and looked at Haruto with a question, and Haruto gave a single small movement of his head, and Sato left and closed the door. "Tell me about Cole," Haruto said. She did not lie. She told him Cole was Marcus. That Marcus had been using the alias for at least 2 years because he had started using it while she was still there, and she had heard him answer to it on calls she was not supposed to know about. She told him what Marcus looked like, how he moved, how he made decisions, what he did when something did not go the way he planned. Haruto listened to all of it without a word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time, and she had learned by now that his silence was not emptiness. It was the sound of something being decided. "He came to us," Haruto said finally, "which means he already knows you're here." It came through on the secure line Sato had set up for her 2 days after the arrangement was signed. Not her old number, not the address she had used to her previous city, but the secure line built inside Haruto's own system, which meant Marcus had not found her from the outside.
He had found a way in.
The message was 3 words and no punctuation. I see you. Kendra read it once. What moved through her was not quite fear and not quite surprise. It was the specific sensation of a lock you have checked twice turning open from the wrong side. She stood in the kitchen with the phone in both hands for a moment and then walked to where Haruto was working and held the screen toward him without saying anything. He read it. He did not change his expression. He took the phone gently from her hands, set it face down, and looked at her directly. He made a mistake, Haruto said. Contacting you through this line tells us more about where he is in our system than anything Sato has pulled in 3 days. He thought it would frighten you. What it actually did was show us the door he came through. She nodded. Her arms had crossed over her chest, and she could not uncross them. You are not going to face this alone, he said. He paused and said it again, the same words, the same pace. You are not going to face this alone. She understood he was not repeating it for emphasis. He was repeating it because he had seen the way her body had gone into itself when she read the message, and he knew, the way he seemed to know most things about how she worked, that she had heard those words before from people who did not mean them, and he was saying them twice to give her body enough room to decide whether to believe it this time.
She did not say anything.
But she did not look away. What neither of them knew yet was that the message was not the warning. The message was the distraction. He put the offer in front of her the next morning, complete and plain. New documents. A city 3 countries away. A bank account with enough in it to remove every financial reason she had ever accepted a job she did not want. He laid it out without pressure and without softening it, and then he stopped and let her think. Kendra looked at the folder for a long time. She had built this exact offer in her head across 3 years. Night shifts and bus rides, and the particular loneliness of eating in rooms where nobody knew her name. The clean start. The one that actually held. She had wanted it so completely for so long that she had not noticed when she stopped wanting it quite as much. She pushed the folder back across the table. I didn't come this far to disappear again, she said. Haruto looked at her, and it was not the assessing look from the first night or the careful look from the meetings. It was something she did not have a word for, because nobody had ever pointed it at her before. She felt it arrive somewhere it was not supposed to reach.
What are you thinking? She asked.
He was quiet for a moment. I'm thinking, he said, that you are the only person who has ever walked into my world without wanting something from it.
She did not know what to say to that.
So she said nothing. The silence between them was the warmest thing in the room, and neither of them noticed Sato stop outside the half-open door and then walk quietly away without knocking. It arrived just after 2 in the afternoon through a channel Sato had flagged as connected to Marcus's network but had not yet been able to close. Kendra was in the study when her phone lit up. She picked it up without thinking, expecting Renji's response about the reversal timeline. Her brother Darius was sitting on a concrete floor, his back against a wall, his wrists bound in front of him with something dark and thin. He was wearing the gray hoodie he had owned since his first year of university. She had bought it for him. She knew the small bleach stain near the left cuff. His face was not badly hurt. His eyes were open and very frightened, and they were the same eyes she had been looking at her whole life. Beneath the photograph were coordinates and 2 lines.
Come alone.
Tell no one. Walk away from him, or your brother finds out exactly what you've been running from and exactly who helped you run. The phone slipped. She did not feel her legs go. She was aware of the floor coming toward her, and then Haruto's hands on her arms before she reached it, solid and immediate, and she understood distantly that he had been close enough to catch her, which meant he had seen her face change before she had felt it change herself. She could not speak. She held the phone toward him because her hands had stopped accepting instructions from the rest of her. He looked at the screen. She watched his jaw set in the way she had seen once before, quiet and final, like a door being closed from the inside. Darius had never known anything about Marcus or the running. He was a college student. He had nothing to do with any of it. which meant Marcus had found him through a document inside this house that carried Kendra's real name, which meant there was someone inside Haruto's network who had helped him do it. She told him she had to go alone. She said it clearly because Darius needed her to be clear right now, and shaking was something she could not afford. Marcus's instructions were specific. One person, any deviation, and the situation moved in a direction she could not come back from. Haruto listened to all of it standing up, the phone still in his hand. When she finished, he said simply that Marcus would never see anyone else. That's not a guarantee you can make, she said.
It is, he said.
Because my people will already be inside the location before you are anywhere near it. Marcus will be watching the entrance. He will not be watching the ceiling, the south wall exit, or the service corridor behind the main room. I've used that building before. He hasn't. He said it the way he said everything that mattered, without decoration, and she felt the specific weight of a plan that had been thought through while she was still trying to breathe. He looked at Sato, who had come in quietly during the last 2 minutes and was already at the door with his phone out. Sato nodded once and left without being asked, and Kendra understood that the operation had already started and she had not heard the moment it began. Haruto picked up his jacket. She stood, and before she knew she was going to do it, her hand was on his arm, fingers closed around his sleeve above the wrist, and she said his name. Not Mr. Mori. Not the careful neutral version she had been keeping between herself and what she was starting to feel. Just Haruto. He stopped and looked at her. Come back, she said. I always do, he said. She watched him leave and stayed with those 3 words and tried to decide whether they were a promise he was making to her or simply a true thing about himself that had nothing to do with her at all, and the not knowing was the heaviest thing she had felt since she saw Darius on that floor. Kendra was not there when it happened. That was the part Marcus had not planned for. He had built the entire situation around her presence, around one specific image of her walking through that door alone and frightened. She was not there because Haruto had told her the most useful thing she could do is stay at the residence and be unreachable, and for once in 3 years she had let someone else carry the weight of a problem that had her name on it. Sato told her afterward, quietly and in sequence, the way he did everything. Haruto's people had been inside the building 2 hours before the window Marcus had given her. The facility was on the eastern edge of the city, 3 floors, 1 main entrance, 2 service exits, a corridor running the full length of the south wall behind the main room. Darius had been held in a side room off that corridor. Haruto's team came through the back service exit, took the corridor, and had Darius out and into a car before Marcus had finished watching the front entrance for a woman who was never going to arrive. Darius had not made a sound when they reached him. Sato said he had looked at the men coming through the door with the particular stillness of someone who had been afraid long enough that fear had used itself up and left something quieter in its place. His first question was 3 words. Is she safe? They told him yes. He nodded and stood up on his own. Marcus walked into the main room at the agreed time and found it full of people who were not Kendra. Sato said his confidence lasted almost 4 seconds after he understood what he was looking at, which was longer than most people managed. It was over quickly. What Sato did not tell Kendra, and what she would not find out until much later, was that before the end, Marcus had said her name one final time. Not as a threat, as though saying it was the only thing he had left that still belonged to him. Haruto came back before the sky had decided what color to be. Kendra was already standing in the hallway when the door opened. She looked at his face first, because his face would tell her before any words did. He said Darius is on a plane. He gave her the name of the woman sitting beside him, Clara, who had worked with Sato for 6 years, and a number she could call right now if she needed to hear his voice. She stood there and took it in. She turned it over carefully, the way you handle something you are not yet sure is real. Darius is on a plane. Darius is on a plane with someone whose name she had been given. The thing she had been most afraid of for 3 years, the version of events where her past reached sideways and took someone who had nothing to do with any of it, had not happened. That was when it broke. It was not quiet crying. It was the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than the chest, held in place for years by the pressure of needing to function, and when the pressure released, it released completely. She was not aware of moving, but she must have, because Haruto's arms were around her, and she was against his chest, and he said nothing at all. He did not tell her it was over or that she did not need to cry. He held her with the same steadiness he brought to everything, and absorbed what she could not carry alone. When she finally went still, he did not let go.
She did not ask him to.
Neither of them said anything about the fact that somewhere in the last 10 days the distance she had built so carefully between herself and everything that could matter to her had come down entirely, and she had not noticed the exact moment it fell. She waited until the afternoon to say it, when they were both rested enough that the words would land where she intended them. Haruto was at the table with coffee. She sat across from him and said it plainly and without softening the edges. She could not stay if staying meant this. Not the house, not the arrangement, not even him specifically, but the constant arithmetic of proximity to danger, the way every person who mattered to her became a number in someone else's calculation. The way Darius had spent 2 days on a concrete floor in a gray hoodie she had bought him because she had made one choice in a ballroom, and everything downstream of that choice had a cost she kept asking people who loved her to pay without their knowledge. She was not built for a world that ran on that exchange. She said it clearly and watched his face while she said it. He looked at her for a long time. Then he went to the cabinet by the window and came back with a folder she had not seen before and set it open on the table. The documents inside were partially completed. Restructuring filings, asset separation, legal framework for dissolving the operational side of the network while protecting the legitimate holdings. The dates on the draft pages went back 8 months. 8 months ago, she had been in a different city with a different name with no knowledge that Haruto Mori existed. "You were already doing this," she said.
"I had the architecture," he said.
"I didn't have a reason strong enough to finish it." Sato knocked and entered without waiting, which he had never done. The look on his face when he placed a single printed page on the table beside the folder told her that whatever came next was not going to be quiet. The page Sato had placed on the table was a legal counterclaim from Yumi's team against the asset reversal, which meant the next several weeks were going to be complicated in ways that required Haruto's complete attention. The house filled back up with the noise of something large being managed. But that evening it emptied again, and Kendra found Haruto in the main room with the restructuring folder open and a pen he had not used. She sat beside him and was quiet for a moment, and then she said it. She did not plan the wording. It came out the way true things come out when you are too tired to manage them, plainly, like a fact she was reading off a page she had been carrying for a while. She told him she loved him. She heard herself say it and felt the specific surprise of a person who has known something in their body long before their mouth was willing to confirm it. Then she waited. The silence went on long enough that she began quietly dismantling everything she thought she understood about the last 10 days, rearranging it into a version where she had misread all of it. Then he said he had loved her from the moment she slapped him in front of 200 people to save a life that had nothing to do with her. He said it without decoration. He said he had not thought he was allowed to say it out loud.
"Who told you that?" she asked.
"The same world," he said quietly, "that told you that you were safer when nobody could see you." She looked at him and he looked at her, and between them was everything they had both spent years building walls against, and neither of them moved away from it. Renji came to the doorway with a question about the counterclaim filing, looked at the two of them, and walked back down the hall without making a sound. Ending an empire did not look the way she had imagined it would. She had expected something seismic. Instead, it looked like paperwork. It looked like Haruto at the table for 3 and 4 hours at a stretch, working through documents with Sato and Mr. Fun, a quiet lawyer who came on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always refused coffee, never made small talk, and who Kendra slowly understood was the most important person in the building on the days he was present. It looked like phone calls that ended alliances the way you end subscriptions, formally and without drama. It looked like Renji coming back from meetings with signed pages and the expression of a man watching something large, an old come apart with more grace, than he had expected. Kendra worked on the financial restructuring from the legitimate side, tracing clean money from dirty, helping Mr. Finn build a wall that would hold under scrutiny. It was detailed work, and it suited the part of her brain that had always needed something real to press against. One afternoon, she reached the end of a document and looked up and realized she had not checked the exits when she came in that morning.
She stayed with that for a moment.
She did not say it out loud. She turned back to the page. That evening, Haruto came home early and found her at the window with coffee, watching the city the way she had watched cities for 3 years from guesthouse windows and bus station benches, except that this time she was not watching for anything. The view was hers. The evening was quiet. Neither of those things felt temporary. She heard him stop in the doorway behind her and did not turn around straight away. In the reflection in the glass, she could see him watching her the way you watch something you built slowly and did not fully believe was real until it was standing in front of you complete. There were 9 people in the room. Sato stood near the back wall with his hands folded, managing with visible effort the particular difficulty of feeling something in front of others. Renji stood straight beside him, his small notebook absent for the first time Kendra had ever seen him without it. Mr. Finn had come, which surprised her, and accepted coffee for the first time, which surprised her more. Darius stood closest to the front in a jacket she had never seen that fit him properly, his eyes bright and a little wet the way they had always been since he was small, quietly and without acknowledging it. He had met Haruto 3 weeks earlier, shaken his hand for a long time without speaking, and then said thank you in a voice that carried the weight of everything he understood and everything he was choosing not to ask about. The room was one of the smaller ones in the house, cleared of furniture, light coming in from the courtyard in a way that made everything look like something worth keeping. No music. No flowers arranged to communicate anything. Nothing in the room performing anything at all. When Kendra walked toward Haruto, she watched his face and saw in it the woman she had been in that ballroom, hand raised, terrified, choosing to act anyway, and understood that he had been seeing her exactly that way from the first moment and had never stopped. She saw in him a man who had spent years being the most powerful person in every room he entered and had only recently discovered that power had kept him completely alone. He took her hands when she reached him. His grip was steady. She did not check the exits once. The others had gone. Darius had hugged her for a long time at the door and then hugged Haruto, which neither of them had planned, and then left with Renji, who had offered him a ride with the quiet efficiency of a man who had decided months ago to be useful in whatever way the situation required. Sato had been last, pausing at the threshold the way he always did, checking the room once with the habit of 11 years, nodding at Haruto in the particular way that meant everything was accounted for, and closing the door behind him. Now it was just the two of them and the city outside the window, and the specific stillness that follows a day that asked a great deal and delivered more than expected. Kendra was on the couch with her shoes off and her legs tucked beneath her, on the same couch where she had sat the first night with cold tea and the feeling of her old life folding up behind her. Haruto was beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, his jacket gone, the tattoo at his neck visible the same way it had been visible the night. She crossed a ballroom floor toward him with her hand already moving. "I used to count the exits," she said. "Every room I walked into. First thing, before anything else." He was quiet for a moment. "I used to count the people," he said. "Everyone in the room. Who could be turned. Who could be used. Who was already watching." She looked at him. "What do you count now?" He thought about it honestly, the way she had learned. He thought about everything that mattered to him. "Nothing," he said. She looked back at the window. "Me too," she said. The city moved outside, cars and lights, and the low ongoing sound of people living their lives in the dark, and neither of them was watching the door, and that was the whole story. The banquet hall was smaller than the one where it had all started, but it had the same kind of light, warm and chandelier soft, and the same kind of crowd, well-dressed people performing versions of themselves for each other across round tables. Kendra was moving through the room not as a waitress this time, but as herself, beside Haruto at an industry dinner connected to the legitimate holdings, when she saw the young woman near the service corridor. She could not have been more than 22. Catering uniform, empty tray in her hands, standing completely still at the edge of the corridor with her eyes fixed on something across the room and her face carrying the expression of someone who has just understood something terrible and does not know what to do with the knowledge. Kendra recognized it the way you recognize a room you once lived in. She excused herself quietly and walked over and stood beside the young woman without saying anything at first. The young woman looked up, startled, and Kendra could see her deciding whether to pretend. "You don't have to figure out the whole plan," Kendra said softly. "You just have to do the next right thing, even if it's the loudest one in the room." The young woman looked at her for a long moment, then back across the hall, and then she straightened her shoulders in the small, specific way of someone who has just made a decision that will cost them something and has decided to pay it anyway. Kendra stayed beside her until she moved. Some choices don't ask you if you're ready. They just ask you if you're willing, and the distance between those two things is where most people's lives are decided. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. It means more than you know. If something in this moved you, share it with one person who needs to hear it today. And if you have not yet, please like this video, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to Arden Tells Tales. There are more stories coming, and every single one of them was made for you.